Broadcasting from the campus of Salisbury University, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. It's time for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Ghosts on the Eastern Shore. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. There are tales and then there are tales on the Eastern Shore of ghosts who walk at night, or the objects that seem to move all by themselves, or maybe just a sound of a creaking door that sets the mind racing towards its imagination. Well, or is there something more? In our studios, the full light of the morning hours, we have Mindy Burgoyne. She is author of Haunted Eastern Shore, which takes a look at some of the stories that can be told late at night when the sounds and visions of the past are not too far away. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So let me first ask you, how did you get involved with the idea of taking a look at ghost stories on the Eastern Shore and the peninsula?
Well, I moved into a haunted house.
Ah, okay. Well, that explains it. You tell me more.
I was a writer before I moved here in 2002 from Howard County. We moved into an old Victorian in Marion Station, and the strange things started happening. It's a very long story. It's in the book. So I started, I actually got interested in talking to other people that had these sort of things happen. I worked in the town of Snow Hill at the time, and there was a haunted property there, or an allegedly haunted property there, the Snow Hill Inn. And so I decided to write about that. And then National Geographic Television Network saw that article, asked me to work with them on one of their TV series. And then I had to really research working with them. So then I know how to do it. So I started writing about others, and then History Press actually called me and asked me if I would write about a historical book, nothing to do with ghosts. Right. I pitched the ghost things. They had a haunted series, and the first book was published. So that book goes from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, from Cecil to Somerset, all 9 counties. I think there's 26 stories in it. But there's 2 subsequent books. That book was very successful. So 2 years later, I wrote Haunted Ocean City in Berlin, and then last year we published The Haunted Midshore. It's all part of History Press series. And this year, right around Halloween, we'll publish the 4th book in that series, and that's The Haunted Lower Shore. Mm-hmm. So it's all told, I have about 150 stories I've collected. The main resource for that book and all the books is the NAB Research Center here at Salisbury University. So they have an enormous amount of folklore that was taken from a university professor who had a folklore class. She sent her students out to find these stories as part of their learning how to take down folklore stories. And they were all saved, and they're all housed in the NAB Research Center. So I was able to go in there and start pulling out haunted properties, then following up on them to see what people were saying today, and more history about the people and the property to craft and create a ghost story, if legitimately there was one. There were many that I went to. There's this haunt, and I'd go to the local place, and they'd say, no, we don't know anything about that. There's nothing like that. So I'd drop it. But amazingly, there were some that, like the Princess Anne Jail, just knock on the door to the police station, and any person working there, any police officer will say, yes, this place is haunted. We have a ghost tour in Princess Anne. We have 10 ghost walks that are year-round, and the Princess Anne one is certainly very successful because it's a very haunted little town. But the police station is on that, and they will come out and talk to our guests and just share stories about what happens in there. So I was amazed there was so much haunted stuff. But anyway, I guess I'm rambling, but that's how I came to write those stories.
By the way, just before we get into some of the individuals, are there general themes? Did you find similarities between various stories?
That's an interesting question. Most people aren't interested in that answer, but I'm always fascinated by. I have to go and tally how many interviews I've done, but I'm guessing it's probably about 200, maybe 250 of individual people that I've said, okay, and I don't ever lead them in, I'll say, what's the folklore of the place, and let them get around to it if they want to, what's happened to them. Or I'll go to a known haunted site and start asking people this known haunted, like Adkins Hardware in Berlin. That was a good one. I went in and, tried being a woman walking into a hardware store. It's hard enough. And then ask them about ghosts. It's like freak is written right across your forehead. So, and I was so surprised that when I said, look, I'm doing a ghost tour, there's a haunted site right outside this property. First, I want to make sure you're okay with us bringing people to look at your warehouse from the road.
Right.
And secondly, I want to tell you the story. And they had all these other stories. So, well, wait a minute, that's not the ghost. The ghost we have is in, not out. So what I found in interviewing people, a real interesting thing is that all the ghost stories are the same story. So it's almost always the same manifestation. People hear. Probably 80% of the time, it's a hearing issue. I heard my name. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I heard, this noise. I heard that noise. That's probably 80%. You might have 10% that see something, and maybe the rest of the 10% is made up of people that were touched by something or some weird dream. But so hearing is the most common, and the second thing is stairways, bathrooms. The most haunted sites where people experience things are in these places. I'm thinking, when I'm going down and I'm looking at another stairway story, and in my house, all my children have been pushed down the steps. So it's, that to me, I don't know what that means. I have certainly reconfigured what I think about hauntings and all that through all this, but there are those commonalities.
So tell me then a little bit. I think you opened this original book with Holly Hall in Elkton, which is in Elkton, Cecil County, and it's a very dramatic event that occurs in which the father basically renounces his son. Tell us a little bit about that story and the resulting apparition, as it were, that the people seem to think that they've seen.
Yeah, that I did almost had to do no research because everything was in the NAB. And all the newspaper articles were in the NAB. So that is referenced in the book if anyone wants to go and find the original stuff. But I wrote that book in 2009. I did not read that story, but that story is linked to the concept that an object can retain some type of energy that impacts stepping into that next world, or the weaving of the two worlds. In other words, sometimes it can happen with a piece of jewelry, a painting, a tool, a car, where the energy of the spirit is present because of that object. So it's a doorway into that next realm. And what happened with Holly Hall, according to the newspaper reports, was the man who owned it was on one side of, was it, I don't know, the War of 1812, or was it the Revolutionary War? It was certainly
one of them,
right.
Yeah.
And his son was on the other side. His son and he had a daughter.
Right.
So he had a son and a daughter. And so the son was injured, wounded, and laid in a hospital, dying. And he wanted to, of course, his father banished him from the house. If you're going to fight for them, get away. I disinherit you. You never can come back. You are dead to me. But when he got injured, his sister wanted to bring him home because he was dying. And so she did. She went and she arranged to have that done, I think. I'm pretty sure this is how it goes.
Right.
So there's a dramatic scene where that is told where the cart comes up the big circular drive. And if you go stand in that circular drive, that place has an energy that is palpable. But the father comes out, sees his long-lost son, sees that he's dying, has no compassion, and says, "Get out." And the daughter is absolutely heartbroken and distraught. And so the son is taken away and dies. They have a tomb on site where everybody's buried. And the daughter is said to have died of a broken heart. And they put her in the tomb. She had a dog, too. She had a dog that loved her. And they noticed that the dog kept scratching at the door of the tomb. And years later, when they opened the tomb, they found her skeleton by the door and fingernail scratch marks in the... Now, that's probably an embellishment. The fingernail scratch marks is probably an embellishment. But there's probably some shred of truth to that they, people were buried alive quite a lot then. And then there was so all kinds of things happened at Holly Hall. Lots of stories of subsequent families. It seemed to be cursed. They'd move in and, one family had a lot of death, another family had a lot of sickness, and there's never been happiness at Holly Hall since that day. Strangely enough, one of the people recount going up into the attic, and this too was something that commonly happened. People would move out and just leave their stuff because we didn't have moving vans. We didn't have trucks that moved things. So if they had inherited things, they might just leave it behind. But one family recounted that that place was very, very haunted. But when they went up in the attic, they found this picture, this portrait, and they believed it's to be of the sun. And once they removed that portrait, the haunting stopped. So I hope I'm retelling that right. I could possibly get it wrong. I should read my own book. But that's the way I recall it. And that was the power of the story, was that the picture was the doorway. And once she removed that thing, the haunting seemed to stop. Now, interestingly enough, I went back to Holly Hall. It's vacant. It was carved up into apartments and then closed, and it's still closed. It's got a shopping center built all around it, so you could go by it and not see it, and it's big. But I went by it, and we went out into the backyard. The tomb is gone because the river came up and washed it away. But in the backyard, we found all these weird things hanging from the trees that people had made and tied. Things like electrical boxes. At first, we thought maybe people were trying to make bird feeders, but then there were, just bizarre stuff. They were put there by somebody. So I asked the town about it, and they had a developer owns it, and they go, we don't know who's going back there and what they're doing, but, it's a strange place. Let's say that.
Now, you had actually an interesting experience. Tallulah Bankhead, and who was buried at St. Paul's Cemetery Church, and a vodka bottle. And by the way, I'll let you tell this story because I had a slightly different reaction to the vodka bottle. But go ahead. Tell me a little bit about it, because you went over there, yeah.
Tallulah Bankhead was very, very wealthy movie star. As you know, she was the one that coined the phrase "darling," long cigarette holder. She was an avid smoker, drinker, drug user, never really found much happiness. She couldn't have children, married several times. People found out later that with her wealth, she had adopted a lot of kids and been very, very generous. But she didn't have any. Her father was a congressman, I think. They were from Alabama. And so that's when they developed their Washington area connection, was when he was a congressman. I think a congressman. So her sister lived in Chestertown. The family lived there. Tallulah got emphysema and came back to live with her sister to be taken care of because she was dying. They had a big fight, and she ended up leaving and going back to north, New York or Connecticut. And but when she died, her sister brought her to the cemetery there at St. Paul's in Chestertown, and her sister is buried right next to her. But so she's buried there. It wasn't her home. It just happens to be her sister was there. And I stumbled on this story. I was in the Chestertown Historical Society, and I was just asking about ghost stories in the town, and somebody said, well, they say if you put your ear on Tallulah Bankhead's grave, you can hear her singing. And we used to go down and do that when we were little, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's a great story. I just need to go out there. And I mean, even if that isn't true, that's like the old, urban legend. So I went down there to look at it, and it's just a flat slab right next to her sister, an identical slab. And when I got there, there was a vodka bottle on the empty vodka bottle on the tomb. And I think there might have been cigarettes on there too. So it was clearly a token left behind. And the first thing I thought was, well, who would do that? What an awful thing to leave a liquor bottle there. It kind of, to me, it looked like a desecration of the grave. And so I wanted to take a picture of the stones for the book, and I took the bottle off, and just as I took it off, I thought, maybe I shouldn't touch this. Maybe somebody, it's like one of those articles of devotion people leave behind. And I noticed a ring on the grave. So like right where the vodka bottle was a ring like you'd get on a wooden table. The vodka bottle had left a ring, is my point. And so I did remove it. I took a picture. I put it back. I took a picture. So I took a picture both ways. And then I called my man, the clerk of the court, whose name I will not mention. People can figure it out. And he's a great historian. And he said, call the caretaker. I've heard that people put stuff on their grave. Call the caretaker. And he said, the bottle is always there. Anytime we remove it, somebody else will put it back. So we stopped removing it. Nobody cares. It's kind of the thing they do. If it was litter or something, then we'd, stake it out and try to catch. He said, I've never seen anybody come or go, but somebody always leaves that bottle, kind of like the Poe toaster. But I have since taken people back to that grave when we do bus tours, and it's not just the vodka bottle, it's cigarettes, it's Mardi Gras beads, it's always some kind of symbol of that rough life. So there are people going there. I haven't been there in a couple years, but I suspect that whoever's doing that is still doing that. It's some kind of devotion to her in that life.
Because when I read the piece, my reaction, because obviously I was not standing there, was that this was a tribute to the way she lived.
Right, it was.
That was the reaction.
Or the struggle, a tribute to her struggle. Who knows?
Yeah,
It could be, I love to party. Let's leave a bottle on Tallulah's grave.
She would have appreciated it, right?
Maybe.
Also, wanted Patty Cannon, and I probably later in the year I'm going to talk to some folks about her. She's famous on the Eastern Shore. Explain a little bit about who she was and some of the sort of haunting, and I guess there's a skull as well.
Right,
throwing all that out there, you go right ahead and lay it out.
I got to say this one fast. Patty Cannon is a legend. Okay, so the truth is we know nothing much. We know that she had a daughter. We know that her daughter was married to a scoundrel. We know that it's likely that her daughter's husband and Patty first of all, this is the turn of the 19th century when they lived. So it would have been 1780, 1790 that they were really active. As you know, in this region, she lived right at the crossroads of Dorchester, Talbot, and Caroline County in a place now known as Reliance. It's kind of between Seaford, El Dorado, and Federalsburg, if you can imagine that area. And in fact, her property lined all three of those counties. So she and her son-in-law owned a tavern on the Dorchester side. Her house was on the Sussex side, and part of their property was in Caroline. So they literally had property on all three counties at that crossroad. She was known to be in a ring of thieves and bandits with her son-in-law, and one of the things they're most famous for is slave catching. So in this region, there were blacks that were obviously enslaved. Excuse me, but there were also there were free blacks. There were people that lived free. They had businesses, they had families, and but they had no voice. There was nobody taking their side on anything if there was ever an issue. And so they would take advantage of that, and they would kidnap these people and then sell them into slavery. And there was a place now called Cannon Ferry. That's probably Patty Cannon's cousins. It certainly wasn't any of her direct relatives, but Woodland, which is where it is, which is also a very haunted site, is where the ferry was and still is. And so you get across the Nanticoke River, or you go down the Nanticoke River, and eventually out the Chesapeake Bay, intercoastal waterway to the south, where these people were sold into slavery. So if you can imagine anything worse, terrible, terrible things these people did. We also do know that what we don't know is we don't know if the legend that Patty was the ringleader is true. Now, Hal Roth, my friend Hal, who I vehemently disagree with, believes that Patty was some terribly misunderstood lady who took the rap for her scoundrel son-in-law. I think that's highly unlikely. I think she was probably a woman way ahead of her time with very, very strong dictatorial power, and they murdered people. And the way that she also had we also know there were a lot of lawsuits, a lot of property settlements, little squabbles. There were things in the Dorchester County Courthouse that showed that Patty had a long history of creditors and people after her. But the way she got caught was she had a slave boy that lived in the house, kind of her, one that she relied on a lot. And there was a farmer that dug up some bones behind her house. And so, first of all, they were always after Patty. I mean, every jurisdiction was after her. And there's newspaper reports that say, when the Sussex County sheriff was after her, she'd just go over into Dorchester County on her property. She'd get tipped off and she'd just move around her property so they couldn't arrest her. But when they found these bones, they said, well, let's get her. So the three jurisdictions got together and said, we're all going to this. We're going to get her. Actually, what they did was they got that boy. And they did whatever they needed to do to him to get him to tell her him to tell them what the story was. And he said, there's not only those bones. She killed 2 children. They're there too. So they were able to exhume these things, find them. They did capture her altogether. She was an old woman by then. This is 1825, I think. And they took her to jail in Georgetown. Sussex took the arrest. And she died. That's the other thing we know. She died in jail before she ever came to trial. She certainly would have been hanged. But she was so obviously known when you read the papers. She was really known as, if you could imagine, somebody in the local community that everybody knows is a thief, and they just can't wait till somebody gets them. Or the other people that are turning a blind eye. They know what she does, but they choose not to talk about it. Probably had already considered her guilty. So there's lots of stories that say she killed herself. She sewed cyanide into her hem. I'm probably not likely. Somebody killed her. That could be likely. It could be she was an old woman and she died. We don't know, but she never came to trial. She was buried in a pauper's grave there on the Georgetown jail property. And many years later, they had to put in a parking lot, and they exhumed those remains. And the remains, one of the local deputies said, "Oh, I'd like to have the skull of Patty Cannon. Can I have that?" Because they were being reinterred in another place. They said, "Sure, you can have it." And he had it for a long time. It was passed to somebody else who kept. I mean, these guys kept it like in their barn, and people would come and look at it. It was, but the last man who had it really had an affinity with the Dover Library, and so I think his children. He had to move away because he was sick, and his children, in cleaning out his things, donated that skull to the Dover Library, and they actually even had like little commentary that went with it, because so people could see it. So Dover Library had Patty Cannon's skull, allegedly, in this little train case, like a woman's makeup suitcase, a little oval suitcase all lined with nice soft fabric and with the little papers. And when I wrote the book, I wanted to go see it. And I talked to the director of the Dover Library. She said, "Well, you can't come see it because we had to take it off display because now there's a law that says you cannot display human remains, and we want to get rid of this thing. I mean, we don't even own it. We can't find the relatives, and we don't know what to do."
And as I understand, you ultimately held it in your hand.
Oh, so then she called me back and she said, "All right, you can come see it." So I go into this basement office with bookcases, and it was surreal. She walked over to the shelf and she took the train case off and she said, "You know what? I have a little black fabric in case you want to take a picture." And I thought, wow, that's how nice. So I opened it up and I lifted it out thinking, I don't even think I have ever seen a human skull. Maybe in the Smithsonian I have where the evolution display is, but I'm thinking, I don't know if I've ever even seen one. And now I'm holding it, and it had in pencil right on the top, Patty Cannon written. The jaw had fallen away. I took a picture of the skull where my friend Hal, who also went to see it, was better than I in that he got himself in the picture.
Yeah.
They eventually donated it to the Smithsonian, and it's there now.
We've been speaking with Mindy Burgoyne. She is author of Haunted Eastern Shore, as well as a number of other books about ghosts on the Eastern Shore, also involved with the ghost tours here on Delmarva. I want to make sure that we mention that. And we do appreciate you stopping by, chatting with us, and we'll chat later in the year, particularly as your other book comes out. This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
This has been Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Chris Rank produces and is our audio engineer. Don Rush is your host. For podcasts, visit our website, delmarvapublicradio.net, or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. To view the schedule, view the daily times, or visit pac14.org.